Coming up in episode 194 of Creative Writing, we're answering the question, why isn't my book selling?
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up again tonight.
Hello and welcome to Creative Writing. This is the podcast for you, an author who wants to sell more books without being smarmy. And just for the record, smarmy is a word. We had some discussion about this in the Facebook group recently. Sometimes I get asked if I made the word up. I did not. It exists. And I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant, the non-maker-upper of the word smarmy. And I am so glad you are here, whether it's your first or 194th time listening to the podcast. It is great to have you. So today we're going to be answering the question, why isn't my book selling? I'm not asking this about my specific book, but it's just a kind of checklist that you can ask yourself when it comes to your books and wondering why your book is not selling. This is something we all struggle with this, right? Because we want to not just make money, whatever your goals are. If your goal is just to publish a book, we want people to read it, right? So that means we need to sell it. We need to have people downloading it and actually reading it. So this is an important question to us all. And I hear people asking this very often in Facebook groups. And I actually have a service that I'll talk about at the end as well, where you guys can hire me. But for now, I want to provide you with a checklist that you can look at yourself to sort of self-diagnose. And then if you still feel lost, hire me. I'd love to work with you. And I do this for authors pretty frequently. So if you want to find the show notes where I'm going to have all of this information, all the links and more, you can go to createifwriting.com/194 to find the show notes for this episode. So let's talk about why your book isn't selling. As I said, this is a really common question. So if you have books that aren't selling well, you are not alone. I have definitely had books that just haven't sold as well or didn't sell as well, that I've tried to pivot or rebrand and figure this out. So this is a question that we need to be able to ask ourselves and answer. And frequently I see people asking this in big Facebook groups. And here's the thing. There's a lot of value in this. You can get a lot of really great advice, but it can also be incredibly overwhelming. So even if you've ever gone into just like a cover group and asked for feedback on your cover, you probably know that you've gotten some good, bad, and ugly responses in there. But the issue becomes you don't actually know the people in there. You might recognize some of them, but you don't know whether they even know the genre. You don't know whether they even publish books. Often I'll find people giving advice and their books aren't selling either if you go and find their books. So it's kind of like, how are we supposed to help each other? How do we know who to trust? What do we do? So I'm going to provide you guys kind of a checklist to sort of look over your own books and marketing and all the different facets of why your book might not be selling to see if you can pinpoint it on your own. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't still ask in a Facebook group. And in the show notes, I'm linking to, I actually have a sister group to the creative writing community. It's called Creative Critiques. And so if you want to bring your blurb and cover in there, I've kind of made the rules so that you need to kind of qualify your answer. Like, I don't know this genre, but here's my reaction to this. And also you're not supposed to just say things like, I like the cover or I like the blurb, because those aren't helpful. So try to put some things in place to keep it a healthy, happy space that has the same good vibe. It's linked to the regular Facebook group. So if you want to go there, you can go to creativewriting.com/community, which is the main Facebook group. And then the critique group is a linked group in there. So there is value in asking Facebook groups, but let's get into a kind of checklist that you can use to look at your own book to kind of troubleshoot. Okay. So just consider this a troubleshooting guide. When that light goes on your car dashboard and you have no idea what it is and you have to pull out the manual from the glove compartment. I'm not the only one who's done that, right? Lights are always going on in my car. But this is that episode, okay? You got a light coming on that's saying there's a problem. Here is the solution, or just a checklist to help you figure it out. And we're going to start with the cover, because this is your outside packaging. This is the first view that people see. And I think it's the most common issue that people have. So there's a couple things to look at and consider with the cover. And I'll link to in the show notes as well. We've had several great posts and a great guest post from Nate Hoffelder about covers. So the things with the covers are this. First, it doesn't look professional. Okay, so that's going to be the first problem. If your book isn't selling and it looks like you made your cover yourself or you hired a designer and it looks Bad, that is something that's going to keep people from buying your book. They're never going to get to your words if your cover doesn't look professional. Now, buying covers, again, I have lots of links in here. It doesn't have to be crazy expensive, but it's worth the investment, because if you don't have a good cover, or if you don't have the chops to do it yourself, it's going to matter. Okay. The second thing is that it's not genre appropriate. So your cover also, it can't just look professional and pretty, because I see a lot of people coming into Facebook groups with pretty covers, but they don't say what the genre is. And for an indie author, that can be the kiss of death. We don't have giant marketing dollars behind us. We don't have, the benefit of having a big name. We don't have the benefit of a big brand pushing us into bookstores and with their marketing, where the cover matters less. We have to, at a glance, be able to say, have people be able to know what the genre is. So it needs to be professional. It needs to clearly speak the genre. And every so often there's another thing too, like if it's not on trend, which is really related to the genre. And it kind of gets down into that nitty-gritty of knowing what is selling in your specific genre, what is working in your genre. So as a just quick example, when I first started publishing, I was doing a beach series, and I really wanted these beautiful covers of, a beach. And there's a book called Beach Rental, which still sells really, really well, by an author named Grace Green. And it just has like a pretty beach scene on it. And it's not even the most beautiful cover, but that book was selling so well. And I really wanted something like that. But what was selling in sweet romance was couples. And so I did couples on the beach, and they sold well, not my best selling books. And then this past year, books started selling better in the sweet area with, both sweet romance and women's fiction, with really beautiful beach covers. And so I went ahead and rebranded, got much nicer covers because I have more money now. I really couldn't afford the kind of cover I wanted anyway back then. And the books have sold like hotcakes, sold many, many more copies now that they have these beautiful covers. But I'm not sure if they would have sold as well back then with those covers. Yes, they were beautiful. I also couldn't have afforded them, but that wasn't really what was on trend at the time. And this doesn't mean you should continually change your covers. I can tell you I probably won't change those covers, maybe ever again. But again, I was able to afford nicer, more classic covers, so I'm going to keep those. But some of my other books as well, I have rebranded recently just to go with current trends. And so if that's something that you can do affordably, it can often breathe new life into your series. But that's talking about rebranding. That's a whole separate thing. But just to point this out, your cover needs to be professional, genre appropriate, and it is important to look at the trends and look at the things that are going on now and what's selling now. Okay, so once we get past the gatekeeper of the cover, the next reason your book might not be selling is the blurb. And blurbs are so hard for us, even though we are authors. I do have a workshop if you want to learn more about this, and you can find all the workshops at createifwriting.com/workshops. I'll link to it in the show notes as well. But we spent a whole workshop basically talking about blurbs and how to write them and how to write ad copy. It's a totally different beast, and sometimes we get this idea in our head that we can't do it because it's a different kind of writing, but we're still writers. You can do it. But here are the kind of, just to touch on some of the common mistakes that your blurb might make that turn people off quickly. If it's confusing, too many character names, too much of the backstory that we don't need to know, or even just too much of the story. If it's boring, which is similar to confusing, they kind of go hand in hand. And if you're both, it's really bad. So if it's confusing and people can't follow, but it's also boring. And some of that, I think, if you have a whole lot of like blocks of text, that can automatically turn people off. So you need white space in there. You need shorter lines and shorter paragraphs. But if you're telling too much plot, that's where it tends to get boring, but also can be confusing because sometimes, I have some books where the premise is just a little hard to explain. It's not hard in the book. Okay, readers have no problem in the book, but trying to condense it into a blurb is really difficult. And so sometimes you might need to just focus on one aspect of the story because you're trying to get people in the door. You don't want to be misleading, but you don't have to lay it all out there. It's great to give them an understanding of what the story is about, but that doesn't mean you have to lay out every aspect of the plot or the entire premise to them. And kind of, this is a thing you're going to hear a lot from me, but the third thing about your blurb is that if it's not genre specific, and what I mean by that is that there are nuances between different genres of how these blurbs look. And even though a lot of blurb books talk about not writing in first person. If you've ever read a blurb book, there's a lot of popular ones that say you should only write in third person. You'll find, if you go and actually look, that a lot of genres, a lot of niches will have first person, and they'll have first person blurbs. And some of them will have, the male point of view, the female point of view. Some of them will have that in third person as well. You really need to go and check out your specific genre. So a high fantasy blurb is not going to look the same as a rom-com blurb. We know that, but it's important to go actually look. Why are they different? What do you notice about them? So if you're working on your blurb and want to get this to be better, again, there's the Creative Critiques group. There's some really great books on this. Robert Ryan's book on blurbs is one of my favorites. I also like Brian Meek's book on blurbs. I'll try to link to those in the show notes, but you can check out books. You can work on this. You can take my workshop on it. You can also hire someone, but this can get really expensive. And I will say that I've used paid services and hated the blurbs. So I'm reticent to do that. Don't give up. This is a skill set if you're writing a lot of books you need to have. So keep working on it. Your blurb you don't want to be confusing, boring, or not genre specific. You need to have a solid blurb that hooks people in and that they're very clear what kind of book it is, what the genre is, and what they're going to get, the feeling, emotion, what kind of story they're going to get overall. So once we got the cover and the blurb, the next step is the writing. And this one is really hard. And I hate when I do work with clients, whether they're hiring me for the Why Isn't My Book Selling or just working with coaching clients, I really hate when it's the writing that's a problem. And writing is very subjective, but sometimes it just really is the writing. I don't know how many of you use the look inside feature on Amazon. And I'm not actually sure if the other platforms have this, but I use this for sure. Often, I'm not the typical buyer and I don't think you should go on your own. However, I'm just letting you know I do this. Now, there are times I don't even read a blurb. Sometimes I'll buy by cover. Sometimes I'll buy in spite of the cover. And sometimes I do the look inside if I'm curious. And I did ask in a reader group that I run, do you use the look inside feature? And overwhelmingly people did. I was very surprised, especially if it's a new to them author. So if they know you, then your book is selling if they liked your first book. Okay. So if they already know you, then chances are your book is going to sell. If they liked that first one. If they don't know you, they might look inside. And I think first chapters can be really incredibly hard to write. We sometimes shove all this information, kind of like the blurb. We try to put way too much in that first chapter rather than giving breadcrumbs of things that are to come and really getting people in and kind of leaving open loops and things that they want to find out the answers to and dive deeper into. Not to be confusing, but just not answering every single question or giving the whole backstory away in the first chapter. I'm sure you've read some books like this. Let me get to the three things. So anyway, people do look at this and it matters. One thing they might notice in your writing is if it's not well edited. And I do see a lot of complaints in indie author reviews about this. And it took me a while to find a good proofreader that I like and like working with. And so I would highly recommend finding one. And sometimes I'll even pay a friend to go and do a final pass and just make sure. And my beta readers also sometimes will catch things even after the proofreader. So editing matters, readers care. And if they see mistakes in the look inside feature, they're gone. Or if they see a lot of reviews talking about typos, they might be gone as well. Again, it needs to be well written. Your writing should draw people in. And this is something I think we should always be working on. I have an MFA, but that doesn't mean I don't take craft classes because I still do. I'm still taking craft classes. I'm still working on my craft and trying to be a better writer. And so we all have room for improvement. But I have looked at the look inside feature of books and thought to myself, this should not have been published. It's just, really missing some of the foundational parts of writing. And so if we don't have our writing together, we need to work on that. Okay. This is something that matters. And I know sometimes we can get around us a group of people who just want to support us and they might not be critical enough. And then also, I've had people be incredible. I had an ARC reader one time send me back a document with literally something changed on every line of my book. I was just blown away. And it was like a final copy. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going to make some changes. It was like, here's the final of my book. And they corrected everything. And so anyway, we're not going to make everybody happy. You can have really critical people, but sometimes we might have people around us who are telling us, you go, way to go, good job. Because they either, they just want you to do well, or they're not very discerning. I also hear from a lot of first-time authors that, and I'll say this in reviews too, sometimes if there's low reviews and people are asking me why their book isn't selling, the reviews will say things like, I don't usually read romance, but I loved this. Okay. And that's a red flag to me, which kind of gets into that third thing, is the genre expectations. Hey, that's with everything. The genre expectations is in all the parts, right? If you're getting people to read your romance book, your very first romance book, and they don't usually read romance and they tell you it's good, it might be good, but it might not hit the genre expectations for romance readers. You need romance readers to read it. That's a problem. So you need to make sure that your book is actually hitting those tropes and expectations. It matters a lot. You should probably be reading in your genre. I know not all authors like to. I know that they want, some authors don't have time. Some will say that they don't want to be overly influenced. But if you don't know your genre pretty well, I think it's going to be really tough for you to succeed with meeting those reader expectations if you don't see over and over again with these successful books in the genre, okay, this is what the readers expect. This is what the readers expect. This is what the readers expect. I've talked about writing to market before on the podcast, and if you aren't familiar with this, it can seem like one of those concepts that are like, well, aren't you writing for the love? Well, yeah, you're just writing within the confines of a certain structure. Does not mean you can't write things you love. It doesn't mean that you're just cranking out rote cliches, but it does mean that you understand the kinds of things that the readers are looking for with a particular subset of books, and then you're meeting those expectations. Now, you can meet them as creatively as you want, as long as you're not sort of breaking the rules. And an example of that is the happy ever after in romance. So when I first started writing, I've shared this before, when I first started writing clean romance, I wanted to write a series because series make money, but I didn't know, because I was not reading in my genre well enough, I didn't really know that romance has to have that happily ever after. Readers do not want a series in romance where you don't get the happy ever after in that first book. They don't want it to end sadly, but don't worry, she'll get the guy in the next book. That doesn't work. And I did that with a novella that connected two things together. And I was like, the happy ending comes here, and it did not work. And I had to realize that I was writing blindly without knowing the genre expectations. So very quickly I learned them and humbled myself to realize how prideful it was to think, oh, I can write this genre without ever reading it. Okay, don't do that. And I do hear people saying that, like, I don't really read this genre, but I think I'm going to write in it. Well, go read it and then decide if you want to write in it, because that does matter. So the writing needs to be well edited, needs to be well written, and then it needs to meet those genre expectations. Okay, so we've got the main parts of your book itself. The biggest thing, though, if those things are all working together and are in the right place and lined up, is the marketing. And this is the thing that has authors going, ugh. But if you listen to the podcast, I hope that I continue to reframe marketing into something where even if you are not thrilled about it and you don't love doing it, you understand that marketing at its bare bones is just getting your ideal readers in front of your book. It's putting your book in the hands of your ideal readers. That's what marketing is as an author. That's great, right? We want our books in people's hands. Now, the nitty-gritty of it can be tedious. It can be time consuming, and it can be just as frustrating, because just like there are skills to learn with writing a book and getting those covers and getting those blurbs already, that's beyond the scope of a typical author. As indies, we're wearing a lot of hats, okay? We're figuring out covers, we're figuring out blurbs, we're making sure we're meeting genre expectations, and hiring proofreaders and editors, all those things. But we also need to have some sense of marketing, okay? Here's the thing. In 2020, books are not going to sell without getting eyeballs on them. And you have to get eyeballs on them intentionally, okay? There are millions of books on Amazon, and that's just one of the platforms. Millions of books. And people have all kinds of distractions. There's shows they're binging on Netflix. There's all kinds of things happening. So many books. we have to get people in front of them. It isn't going to happen when you click publish on your book. And I've seen people ask this question before. I published my book and no one's bought it. I've only sold a copy. And people will say, well, what did you do to promote it? And they're like, well, just put it up there. If you just put your book up there, it's not going to sell. It may sell a few copies. And there are unicorns who sell books organically without doing anything. And I know a few of them, and it happens, to some degree or not, but I know some people who are pretty successful who don't do a whole lot of marketing and their books just sell. And so we're not going to talk about that because I have no idea why. And it's one of those like baffling things. But here's the thing, we don't want to be unicorns, because if you don't know why your book is selling and you're not doing anything actively to sell it, that is outside the norm. That is not the typical author experience. If that's you and you don't know how to market your books, when that mysterious unicorn magic stops working, you're not going to know what you're doing. So we don't want to aim to be unicorns. We want to aim to be Clydesdales, those workhorses that work hard, slow and steady wins the race, okay? But unicorns are pretty, I know. But let's aim to be Clydesdales, those nice working horses. And we have to do things to get people in front of our books. And I have a lot of posts that I'll link to about this, about how to actually market your book. Just, to kind of touch on the things here. Organic doesn't work that well. You can help yourself by using good keywords in your metadata. So the metadata is the stuff like Amazon asks for 7 keywords. The other retailers as well will ask for certain keywords, categories, the kinds of words like inspirational, heartwarming, thrilling, page-turning that might show up in your blurb that kind of trigger either the algorithms or trigger the readers to be more likely to buy. There are some organic things that you can do, but otherwise you're going to have to do free and paid promotions, okay? Free promotions or paid promotions, probably a combination. When you're just starting, the free ones might be the ones you focus on. This is things like your newsletter and newsletter swaps. And there is some cost because you need to pay for a newsletter provider. I use MailerLite and ConvertKit are the recommendations that I have, but there's MailChimp, Flowdesk, SendFox, like there's all kinds of different ones that people use out there. Newsletter swaps in general are free. It's where authors will send emails to their list with book recommendations or just listing new books that are out. That's one way you can do it. There are Facebook reader groups all over Facebook, but most of them I would say are what I would call link graveyards, where there's a lot of these reader groups, if you've ever been in one, where it's just author after author after author after author dropping a link and leaving, and there's no engagement. No one's liking any posts. There are very few comments on posts. There are engaged reader groups, and often these are run by authors who are spending the time to grow those groups. But authors will often have takeovers that they open up to other people. They will, if you network with other authors in your genre and specific, Facebook groups for that, because almost every genre has a specific Facebook group. You can talk about, hey, can I share this in my Facebook group, and then you share it for yours or share on your page. Those are organic things, or not organic, but they're free things that you can do to promote your book. Posting on Instagram, social media, doing what I would call content marketing, which is blogging around the topic of your book. This works really well for nonfiction because there's all kinds of ways that you can blog and create content around the topic in your nonfiction book. It's a little bit harder for fiction. People are not going to just find your blog so that they can learn about your writing process. Like that's not interesting to anyone but your super fans. And if you already have super fans, you're not probably worried about why your book isn't selling, right? It's discoverability. And so you want to be writing something like I've been working on a content strategy for my Emma blog, which is very inactive, but working on things like roundups, like the best beach books, the best YA beach books, like the best, I'm doing one now, the best clean Christmas romances, the best rom-coms, roundups of books that I can also use SEO in my post, which is search engine optimization. Now, these are all things that you have to learn, right? I know this from my blogging background. So this is easy to apply. It's free. These are kinds of things you can do. You could go Google content strategy, or maybe that's something I'll talk about on the podcast, but there are free ways to do things, okay? They may not move the needle as much as paid things. And so I feel like as much as we can, once we know that the cover and the blurb and the writing are all where they need to be. So once we've ticked off all those boxes, then we can start doing paid things, because there's nothing worse than seeing people throw money at a book that has a terrible cover, or a book that has an awful blurb, or just you do the look inside and the first page is like, ugh. There's nothing worse than seeing somebody waste their money on that. Paid promotions are just kind of a part of life. So whether you're doing the email promotions where you're having those paid newsletters like Robin Reads or eReader News Today or Book Cave, send out your sale book to their audience looking for books on sale. Or if you're doing Facebook ads or Amazon ads or BookBub ads, there are lots of ways to do paid promotions. And I just feel like this is a part of our author career that's something we need to learn how to invest. But if you're investing before you get those other things right, your book isn't going to sell. So if you're putting money into ads and your book isn't selling, you need to step back and go back to that start and figure out what the problem is that's keeping your ads and your paid promotions from working. So let's get to some truth talking, because that's really your checklist. Okay, we have the cover. It needs to be professional, genre appropriate, and it needs to be on trend. Your blurb, it needs to not be confusing, not be boring, and it does need to be genre specific as well. Your writing needs to be well edited, well written, and meet those reader expectations for your genre. And then your marketing, you get to kind of do your mix of free and paid promotions. But here's the thing. Some books and some genres are just really hard to sell. And I've talked to multiple authors about this, and a lot of successful authors have just one book or one series that just doesn't sell. It doesn't matter what the covers look like or how many times you change them or the kind of ads. I've talked to so many authors that just have certain books that don't sell. And there are certain genres that don't sell very well. Like general literary YA fiction is such a heavily populated with, traditional book genre that it is really hard to sell books if that is the genre you're choosing to write in. So some of this can be avoided. Like if your goal is to sell a lot of books, you really do need to think about what genre you're writing in, okay? Because it matters. Because you might write a book that's just a very hard book to market because of the type of genre you're writing in. I don't want to be defeatist. I don't want to say that I don't want to make it sound like we're all just writing for money. Again, we want readers. We want our books to be loved and enjoyed. It's just harder to do that in certain genres. So it's practical if we're going to be investing money and investing time and especially taking this indie journey and doing it ourselves, we should think about that. It's smart to think about. Now you could think about this and then decide, no, I just want to write for the love. Do it, but just know that your book may be more difficult to sell. Okay, now if you find yourself with a book or series that just doesn't sell, don't give up. You don't have to take it down from Amazon if it still has a professional cover and is well written. It's just not selling. You've checked off all those boxes, but it just doesn't sell. Write another book. Move on. Don't waste marketing dollars on books that aren't selling. You can't, if it's not selling at $5 a day, it's not going to sell at $50 a day. Okay. And talk about why your ads aren't working is a whole other episode. And I may get to that as well. Like, why are your ads not working? But you can just move on to another book, move on to another series. And maybe if you found yourself frustrated with a book that didn't sell or a series that didn't sell, really consider that genre and where you want to be before you dive in again. But do move on and leave it there. Your super fans may find that series and love it. I've found some really obscure books that didn't have big reviews from authors I've loved, and I love those books, but I could see kind of why they don't sell, and I love them because I love that author. So those books may sell, they may become a cult classic, or maybe there's suddenly a trend that'll come in 10 years and your book is going to blow up. Who knows? But for now, if it's not selling and you've checked off all those things and legitimately checked them off, move on. So this is my last note, is that whole legitimately checked them off thing, because I think sometimes we love our books, right? I don't think sometimes we love our books. We love our books, but I think sometimes we love them so much we can't step back enough to tell if our cover, even though we don't always design the cover, somehow we get this emotional attachment. Like, I love my cover. How can you say it doesn't work? We get emotional about the cover. We get emotional about all kinds of things, and we're not able to see our book as clearly as we need to. And so I think if you want your book to sell, we do need to be willing to listen to other people's advice. We do need to be willing to show the cover to somebody, say, this seems genre appropriate to me. Does it seem genre appropriate to you? And then we need to be willing to hear them say, no, it doesn't actually. And here's why. And that happened with my very first billionaire book that I wrote. I didn't mean to write, I meant to write a parody of a billionaire book because I thought they were stupid. And I ended up writing one that is still, I think, my highest reviewed, at least for now, my newest book. think it's going to surpass it pretty quickly here, but it was I think it was my third or fourth book. And people seemed to love it, but it wasn't selling as well. And I talked to Victorine Liesk about this because, hey, I'll tell you, I'm always hiring people. Like I'm always studying my craft. When I get to a point and I hit a wall, I hire someone that's a bunch of steps ahead of me and I talk to them. Okay. So I sell my services to people who are steps behind me, but I also am hiring people as well because I'm always trying to get better. But I was like, look, why isn't my book selling? And she said, your cover, as much as it sort of looks like a billionaire book, the guy's in a t-shirt. He has to be in a suit. As obvious as that seems, it did not seem obvious to me. I just picked kind of a handsome guy and yeah, he happened to be in a t-shirt, but my book was casual. They weren't running around in business suits all the time. It was like a reality show. But he did wear suits sometimes. So I changed him into a suit and it sold better. Okay. It seems dumb. Those little things matter. Like I said, the covers, they just matter a lot. Even little nuances like that. And so we need to be willing to listen to the feedback from other people. We need to be able to hear that our writing needs work if we want to sell more books. We need to be able to hear that we just have to hire a different editor because that one stinks. We need to be able to hear that our cover doesn't work. We need to be able to hear that our blurb doesn't work. We need to also be able to hear sometimes, hey, I think this book is great, but it may not sell because of the genre. So we need to be open to that feedback. I think it helps to talk to other people, but this is a checklist you can look at too. We just may not always be able to be the best judge of that. And so I think the best thing you can do is to hang out with other authors, to know your genre well, but be willing to talk about and share this with other authors in your genre. So there's always little Facebook groups that are smaller, and I think that smaller groups tend to be better unless you get too insular, but there's lots of great ones out there. I'm in specific groups for urban fantasy, specific groups for clean urban fantasy. I'm in clean paranormal fantasy groups. I'm in, I'm in clean rom-com groups. I'm in strategy groups for sweet romance. I'm in a whole lot of groups and they're all niched down to the specific authors. And so if I need somebody to read my rom-com and make sure it's funny, I know which group that I'm going to. This is something that we need to do. We need to be able to and willing to do this with each other and help each other out. We also need to know who to listen to. And it is important to try to do it yourself, to be able to try to take a look and get to that point where you can objectively look at your book and your marketing and see if this is an issue. So these are the core things that I see when I'm helping authors with books. And again, if you're stuck and want to hire me, you can do that. I'll put a link in the show notes, but you can also go to createifwriting.com/why. I usually only take one client a week, so I can get backed up pretty quickly. But this is a service that I do for authors and have heard the feedback has just been that it's beyond what they thought it would even be. But those are the kinds of things that I'm looking at. I'm being those objective eyes after seeing the things that have sold and worked well for me and kind of studying the markets. This is something I'll do for you, but I hope you can also learn to do it for yourself. And then when you get stuck, hire someone, whether that's me or somebody else. Okay, we all want to sell more books. We all want to connect with readers. And I hope that this episode has helped you kind of get a grasp on ways that you can kind of troubleshoot when your book isn't selling. So if you want to go to the show notes and find all the links and things that I've mentioned in this episode, you can go to createifwriting.com/1944 episode 194. If you'd like to sign up for my weekly emails, you can go to createifwriting.com/quickfix to get my weekly Friday emails that I talk about resources, tips, news in the industry, and things that you need to know as an indie author wanting to sell more books without being smarmy. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you to Jasmine Commerce of JasmineCommerceMusic.com for the music you are currently listening to on this show. And now it's the time where you go out and create content that you love and serve your people well.